Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Request for Applications webinar. My name is Carly Moore. I'm Lumbee, and I am an Associate Program Officer at the Native American Agriculture Fund. We're so happy that you're taking time to join us today. I see that people are still joining, so please bear with us as we wait for them to join. We're just going to wait 2 minutes, and then we'll get started. At any time, if you have questions, you can ask those to us, and we'll take them at the end. And please let us know if you're having technical issues in that box as well. So I'll be back in a minute and a half. Okay, thank you. We've had quite a few more people join, so thank you for your patience there. Again, my name is Carly Moore. I'm Lumbee, and I'm Associate Program Officer at the American Agriculture Fund. This is our 4th webinar in this 2020 Request for Applications period. The content is the same, but the questions and answers period is always dynamic. So if this is your first time, we're going to get you caught up, and if you are joining us for a second or third or fourth time, thank you for being here. Let's get started with some housekeeping. We welcomed you to submit questions throughout the period of time. You do that through the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel. We're going to hold all the questions until the end, but please send them in as they come across your mind so you don't forget. If you have a specific question and you want to get into more conversation, it might be better to do that on a one-on-one basis, and so I would encourage you to either call or email. Our information will be presented on the screen later, but our phone number is 479-445-6226, and our email address is grants, GRANTS, at nativeamericanagriculturefund.org. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce our CEO, Janie Hipp. She will walk you through the content and will be around to answer questions. Janie, take it away. I'm going to give you mouse privileges.
Thank you so much, Carly. And Carly, can you hear me okay? Just checking.
Yes.
I think so. Okay, great. So hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be on the webinar again with you today. And we hope to answer whatever questions you might have about the request for applications that we have out publicly right now, because just as a reminder, the deadline is approaching. And so we'll get into discussing that in a few minutes, but we just want to encourage you to go ahead and begin working on this if you haven't already. Many of you have. We've already have quite a few folks who are registered in the system and are already conceptualizing what they want to do. But I just wanted to start today by making sure that you all know that we're thinking about you every day. Our staff have been fully remote for a couple of months now, and we're going to stay that way out of the intense levels of safety that we hope you all are exercising at your end as well, so that we're all safe and try to remain as healthy as possible. So in the meantime, let's take a look at the request for applications that we have out today. And I'm going to walk through quite a few slides, so bear with me. And then Tony is going to come on at the end, or if she's not available, I think somebody else on our staff will, and we'll walk through some mechanics of actually getting into the online portal that we use. And then the next and last request for applications we have next webinar that we have next week is going to focus on a lot of kind of technical things like that so that nobody has last minute glitches. So NAAF was created, it is a private charitable trust, and it was created from the final Cypre Fund settlement of the Keepseagle litigation. Many of you on this phone call or webinar know very deeply what was involved in that litigation, but we have the entire, or pretty much the entire history of the litigation and a recap of it on our website. So that link on this slide will take you to that if you want to do some background information if you're unfamiliar with the case. But most folks who have worked in the space of Indian country agriculture for a while are very familiar with the Keepseagle litigation. NAAF Board of Trustees gathered up when the case had made it through its final settlement steps and signed the trust agreement that governs all of our operations. They signed that in late July 2018. This is a 20-year spend down trust, and what that means is that the funds that make up the corpus of the trust fund itself are have to be spent out in 20 years. And so when they gathered up in July of 2018, that started the clock moving. And so NAAF will expire, and hopefully not the legacy of NAAF, but NAAF as an organization will no longer exist after 2038. So for any of you who are interested in the trust agreement, I strongly encourage anyone who applies for funding through NAAF to actually take the time to pull up the trust agreement on our website and just study it and understand it. The entire trust agreement itself is on our website, and we've made that publicly available since the beginning. This slide really kind of walks you through some of the, not all, but of the history, but some of the major pieces of kind of milestones in the Keepseagle versus Vilsack case. The case was actually brought back in 1999, very much previous to the Obama administration, but the reason why it is entitled Keepseagle versus Vilsack is that during the Obama administration, the case was finally settled. The original settlement was $680 million, an additional $80 million in debt relief. There was some tax relief, some equitable relief, in addition to changes in some farm loan program policies. The case, if you'll remember, was all about access to credit and access to non-discriminatory servicing of loans that Native folks have had with USDA Farm Service Agency. So when the settlement agreement was approved, there was a claims process and then payment of successful claims that occurred thereafter. What happened at the end of that was that approximately $380 million remained in the settlement fund. And there was some time that went past, there was significant negotiation, but eventually a second payment was pulled out of that $380 million. And those second payments were partial payments, partial to the first payment, were made to the prevailing claimants in the case. There was also a $38 million fund that was set aside for immediate distribution. And several of the, some of you on the phone call actually may be fast track fund recipients, your organizations. Some of you may not. We have those listed on our website. You can go to our website and pull down the list of who are the fast track fund grantees. That process actually occurred back in 2016, was held under seal of the court for a couple of years. And so when everything started to be resolved in 2018, those funds were released to those fast track grantees under a 2-year plan that each one of them would use to invest their funds in the projects that they put forward that were selected. And so what we ended up with in July of 2018 was approximately $266 million, which was to be used to actually create the Native American Agriculture Fund. So that kind of takes you a very fast forward through the case itself and what occurred, but also gives you a sense of how we got to where we are. Carly, I may need your help to advance because I seem to be seized up here. Sorry, folks. Okay. So, as I told you previously, the trust agreement was signed by all of the trustees when they gathered up for the first time in July of 2018. The 266 million was actually not transferred to their control until December of 2018. So we didn't even have any employees for NAAF until March. I think were our first couple of employees that we brought on. But in the time period between March and August, we were able to stand up and get out to the public the first request for applications. And those 2019 grantees of NAAF are also listed on our website. You can take a look at who they are and what their projects were all about. And then now here we are and having our second request for applications, which was released April 1st. So we've been moving as quickly as we possibly can, running most days, and very excited to keep this thing moving so that we can continue to put resources out into native agriculture. The future requests for applications that we have may differ in the scope or the amount of funding that the trustees decide to use for that particular year. So those will just kind of come as they come. And so we want to make sure that not only do we hear from you as and any other eligible grant recipients or any native farmers or ranchers or fishers. So we've created a survey that we check about monthly, and we try to get a sense of what folks are seeing and what they think is needed and necessary out there. And so just know that we're going to talk today through the 2020 request for applications, but it may differ slightly as we move forward year to year. Next slide. Okay, if you look at section 7 of the trust agreement, here's the trust's mission. The trust mission is to make grants to eligible grant recipients, and those are described in section 8, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But the mission is to provide grants that would focus on business assistance, agricultural education, technical support, and advocacy services to native farmers and ranchers to support and promote their continued engagement in agriculture. So we want to and encourage folks to apply for funding from us, but we also really, this is our touchstone. This is what we always go back to, is how is what we're funding going to drive right into this mission statement that's included in section 7 of the trust agreement itself. Okay, this slide shows you who our trustees are. The trustees were all appointed by the court in the Keepseagle case, as I was appointed by the court to be the first CEO of NAAF as well. And so this shows you this is an all-native trustee board. These folks are on staggered terms, so they will roll off at some point. And so occasionally you're going to hear us probably in the future years talk about the need to nominate folks to actually serve on the board of trustees as we move along. But these are the folks that set aside the time and attention necessary to really get this thing up and running, and we're thankful for their work. Okay. The request for application timeline for this year, for 2020, we've already passed some of these dates, but we released it April 1st. Monday, June the 1st at almost midnight Central Time. Please get your application in. That's when the request for application will close. However, because of COVID and where we all are, as a country and as a globe at this point, we went ahead in drafting up the request for applications and included a 2-week flexibility period. I'm going to get into what that actually means and what we need for you to do to request, that flexibility time period. But we are going to finally close the request for applications on June the 15th. But there is a little bit of a process we need you to undergo if you need that extra time, and I'll cover that in just a few minutes. Again, the last webinar we have in our series is May the 28th, which is a week from today. And all of the webinars that we've done so far are archived on our website. And we also put out frequently asked questions, and we build on those with every webinar. So be sure and pull those up and take a look and study those. You might actually have some answers to questions that are commonly posed, and our staff are amazing, and we can turn around usually 24 or 48 unless hours of a response. If you have some unique question that's not covered in those FAQs, we're happy to do that. It might take us a little bit longer on some really complex questions, but we stay at it until we get answers back out to folks. Carly and Tony will go over how to make sure that your questions surface up, but we're open for those all along the way. Next slide. This I've already kind of touched on. What we need for you to do, we actually put this 2-week flexibility period in because we were concerned that folks are not operating in their offices, or they may be having trouble with solid internet connections. They may have trouble in obtaining signatures that they need, or they may have trouble getting their hands on required documents, or just reaching out to partners if they want to pull partners into their application. So what we need for you to do is to go into the system, get yourself set up, push submit on, get as much as you possibly can into the system, and by the deadline of June the 1st, and immediately turn around and tell us that you're suffering from some of these problems, and ask that we give you another 2 weeks. We're happy to do that, but we need for you to actually request it of us so that we can get back with you and make sure that you have the communication that it's there and in place and able for you to use that extra 2 weeks. If you got any questions about that, just email us quickly. We tried to make it not onerous on anybody, but we also do need for you to go into the system, get yourself going, get yourself set up, do as much as you can, and then drop us an email and let us know by June 1st that you need that extra 2 weeks. So if you look at Section 8, and this is really important, we get a lot of questions about who's eligible to apply. We get those probably every week. And the trust agreement itself is very specific. It's in Section 8A, and this language that you're looking at is actually coming straight out of the trust agreement itself. So there are 4 types of eligible grant recipients. The first one is nonprofit organizations with 501c3 tax-exempt status. Now, if you are a nonprofit organization, but you've not been awarded that 501c3 status by the Internal Revenue Service yet, you can still apply, but you've got to apply through a fiscal sponsor that has received that 501c3 status. We will be asking you to upload into the system your one-pager that is from the IRS that grants you 501c3 status. The second organization type is educational organizations, and there's a long list of those that are in Section 170 of the Internal Revenue Code. If you're an organization that's listed in the Internal Revenue Code, you will also have documentation proof that you are a recognized educational organization under the Internal Revenue Code. So that's your second one. The third category are community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, including certified native CDFIs and emerging native CDFIs. provided that the CDFI is a tax-exempt organization described also in 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. And then the fourth category on the next page is tribal governments, state or federally recognized, or an instrumentality of a state or federally recognized tribe, including a nonprofit organization chartered under the tribal law of a state or federally recognized tribe that provides assistance designed to further native farming and ranching activities. But the use of funds by tribal governments is restricted exclusively to charitable and educational purposes. In other words, the funds that NAAF would provide you under this under our request for applications, if you're a grant recipient, you would have to use that for charitable and educational purposes. The grant recipient has to provide NAAF with audited financial statements and any other reports as required by us. And then the grant recipient, if it is a governmental entity, a tribal government or an instrumentality, shall agree to a limited waiver of sovereign immunity. And this next language is really important with respect to NAAF's right to enforce the terms of the grant. We get a lot of questions about this. We totally understand how sensitive this issue is for tribal governments. We absolutely understand, but that language there that is on this slide is very specific. It is not anything that we have discretion about. It is a requirement of our trust agreement that creates NAAF in the first place. What we have done is we have actually worked with our lawyers, and we've pulled together some sample waivers and sample resolutions, and we're happy to provide those to tribal governments or instrumentalities of tribal state or federally recognized tribes so that they can understand what we're looking for. And we're happy to work with tribal governments on this issue. If you are this kind of a potential grant recipient, then your contact is going to be myself, but your really first point of contact is going to be Tony on our team, and she is a lawyer and with a lot of experience in this space. So we're happy to talk these things through with you, but it is an absolute requirement. We must have it in order to fund you. And if you'll go to the next slide. Again, just a quick reminder here that we can work with fiscal sponsors if you're an organization that has not achieved the 501c3 status yet. If you look at our system, we use the Foundant grant making system. If you actually look inside that system and get yourself registered, you're going to see that there are some requests for some uploading of documents that kind of go to the issue of what kind of organization you are. The reason why is we are required to verify your eligibility. So we will be asking you as an applicant for some documentation of the things that we need to have in our files. But we also get a lot of questions, not so much anymore, but in the beginning for sure, about what does it mean to be a farmer or rancher. And I can tell you one of the first gatherings that the trustees engaged in early on back in 2018, they tackled this issue, but they've taken the position that it really needs to be read in the broadest context possible. Basically because food and agriculture and food work and food sovereignty work in Native communities is so varied and so interrelated with our communities. And so we are looking at farmers of all types of food and fiber products and ranchers of all types of livestock. We're also looking at fishers, those working in forest products, harvesters, gatherers, and those working in community agriculture, for instance, in the area of community gardens, food hubs, farmers markets, and things of that nature. So we have taken the position that we're going to have as expansive a definition of those terms and basically of the terms of agriculture, if you will, as possible. What we ask you to do also is that you tell us how you're going to use the funds that you're seeking from us to provide services to Native farmers and ranchers, including those who want to become farmers and ranchers, and to support and promote their continued engagement in agriculture. So part of the reason why we put this language in this slide is that some folks think that you have to be established, right, to actually be able to be worked with, and we are as equally determined to fund projects that actually will work, that will actually put our arms around the folks who are trying to be farmers and ranchers within our communities. Again, the trust agreement focuses on those issues around business assistance, agricultural education, technical support, and advocacy services. This next few slides, we're going to be talking pretty rapidly through some of the eligible uses and eligible organizations that can be involved in the NAAF grant-making process. The trust agreement itself, and I think we've done a fairly good job of getting the word out on this. The trust agreement itself does not allow NAAF to provide grants directly to individual farmers and ranchers. It also doesn't allow us to do loans directly to individuals. But what we can do is to work through those 4 types of eligible organizations that I just talked about. And through those intermediaries, if you will, those organizations, they then can in turn work with individuals. So we are just prohibited as NAAF directly from engaging and giving a grant directly to an individual or a loan directly to an individual. The other thing I wanted to share with you today is that as we did last year, we're looking for projects that can be anywhere from 12 months to 18 months or to 24 months. At this moment in time, we're really not looking for projects that can go past 24 months. Again, like I said earlier, that could change over time, but right now, and this particularly for this cycle, we're still looking for things that are going to be done within a 12, 18, and 24-month time period. The funds can be used for project support, for scholarships, for re-granting programs, for loan programs, or for capital expenditures as well. This slide, and I think the next one, talked also a little bit about who's not eligible. We really have to focus on our mission. And so you may have a great idea, but if you're not really focusing on business assistance, agricultural education, technical support, or advocacy to Native farmers and ranchers, then NAAF's RFA is really not cut out for you. We're also, at this point in time, I cannot see this changing anytime soon. We're not going to be funding work based outside of the US. We really have to focus on things that can be done to further the success of Native farming and ranching and provide resources designed to further that success. So if you're trying to do something that really doesn't kind of drive into the heart of success of Native farming and ranching, then that, again, this may not be the best avenue for you to pursue. Again, if there are things that Native farmers and ranchers need, but perhaps it's not agriculture related, again, that's not really an area that we know that they have a multitude of needs as families and folks within our communities, but we really are trying to, again, drive into the agriculture related needs that they have. And then we also, because of who and what we are looking for things that are charitable and educational that can, work with as many folks as possible and to try to actually, help out on the educational or support needs of Native farmers in as broad a context as possible as well. Our trust agreement does not allow these funds to be used for litigation. So just keep that in mind. It also doesn't allow for direct lobbying or political activity as defined by the IRS, and that's efforts that are very specific, and those we are not going to fund as well. However, advocacy is one of our 4 major areas that we can fund. And just having worked in these kinds of areas for a really long time, there's a lot that you can do to advocate on behalf of the people that we really want to help, which is Native farmers and ranchers, without direct lobbying or political activity. And so we just need you to keep in mind that as you put together your ideas for funding through NAAF. Also, you know, some educational organizations provide educational services to folks who are non-native as well. And that's okay with us, but we really need for you to, if you are an organization that serves, you know, a multitude of folks, then we really need to be focused on funding what it is you're doing with Native farmers and ranchers. We really want to, again, drive into the space of how our primary and sole community can be actually lifted up and supported. Next slide. We have received questions because, as you recall, previously I talked about the fast track grantees. Those grantees are eligible for additional funding from NAAF, but the trustees have determined that it really needs to be for brand new projects that they weren't funded for before, or they have completed the project that they were, or the work that they received fast track monies for, and it's off to the next phase of that work. I hope that makes sense. So we're looking for things that are new, or the next phase, or a continuation of the work that's already been completed. The same holds true for 2019 grantees of NAAF, and they're listed on our website again. I made reference to that earlier. Those folks are eligible to apply for 2020 as well. But again, what we're looking for there is something that's new or something that's a continuation of previously funded work. In other words, the next phase of that work. So we're not allowed to consider applications by organizations that are community-based organizations that don't have 501c3 status. But again, there's a lot of those, they tend to be smaller, not necessarily, but they tend to be smaller. They just haven't chosen to go the 501c3 route. You can still be involved in work that's funded through NAAF. You just have to seek out and find a fiscal sponsor to work with you on that path. And please keep in mind, as y'all are determining what you are thinking that you want to try to get funded, please keep in mind that core to the issue of the Keepseagle case was access to credit. And so we're going to give additional consideration. If you actually look at the evaluation criteria that are towards the end of the request for applications itself, which you can download off of our website, you will see that there's 7 criteria that are evaluation criteria, and access to credit is one of them. So we just need for as many projects as possible to really kind of get at this core issue of access to credit. We sometimes get questions about what does that mean. If you actually look at that page of the RFA itself, we've actually described in the RFA some ideas that you might think about in terms of what does it mean to work in the area of access to credit. There's a lot of work that can be done. A lot of it is in business planning, or helping folks clean up their credit, or you know, just understanding your numbers, understanding your marketing plans. There's so much that really helps individuals access credit anywhere. And so there's just a lot of financial education. We're currently sponsoring some a whole string of webinars on farm financial issues that have to do with really getting in the weeds around understanding the financial aspects of your operations. And so when you're thinking about that, poke around on our website and take a look at the resources and the webinars that we've uploaded there, and you'll get even some more ideas about how you can help folks get access to credit and get themselves better prepared to utilize credits in ways to support what they're doing. There's all sorts of project types. I guess us and our whole team at NAAF, we just continue to be amazed at how creative everyone is, and it's wonderful to see all the different types of projects. But as we walk through the rest of these slides, kind of keep in mind that we're open to things that combine focus areas. For instance, a project that combines business assistance with technical support, or agricultural education with business assistance. So keep in mind, you don't have to utilize just one of those mission areas. You can combine them if that makes sense for what you want to do. You'll also see in the request for applications the term value-added agriculture. This is an area where a lot of folks believe that there is unlimited growth potential for folks who want to do commercial related agriculture. And that whole value-added agriculture area is probably even going to be more important as everybody emerges from COVID and continues to try to recover and rebuild. And so value-added agriculture, in essence, means taking raw food products, right, and turning them into something else. And I know that may seem kind of vague to some folks, but I always use this example, and maybe it's too simple to use, but I always think of it in terms of taking strawberries and making strawberry jam. By doing that, you've added value to what it is you're trying to sell. And sometimes adding value can be packaging or branding or labeling or using some sort of specialized process, like organic production. It's really kind of all over the map. And so if you're in that, if that's what, rings your bell and that's what you want to be working on is value added, just understand that we think of it as broadly as possible. We really need, every farmer and rancher I've ever worked with in my whole life always needs solid information, solid educational information, solid technical support. So anything that you can do in that area is much appreciated. But that holds true also for policies that have something to do with farming and ranching and food. Those kinds of advocacy projects actually depend on solid educational information, solid data, and solid arguments. So just keep in mind that it's very much capable of also mixing up the advocacy piece with educational piece and technical issues as well. So the other thing that we get asked about a lot is, there's quite a few scholarship programs that are out there for Native students who might want to pursue a higher education degree or a 2-year degree or even a technical degree of any kind. And while we totally get that and we're totally supportive of it, what we have to have for NAAF to fund it is that it be driving into the food and agricultural sciences, the food and agricultural area. We know there's super smart folks out there, and maybe they have it in their minds that they want to be the next doctor, MD. That's fantastic, but that's really not what NAAF needs to fund in terms of the use of these funds. If you are interested in becoming a licensed veterinarian, now we're talking. So just keep in mind that while we totally support educational opportunities and degree programs for Native students, we really are looking to support those that drive into what we need in terms of food and agriculture support systems for Native folks who are either technical support, technical skills, or 2, 4, and graduate level skills as well. Okay, and so let's move now to the funding areas for 2020. First of all, if you applied last year, some of this is going to look familiar. If you didn't, then this may be new to you, but kind of hang with us and we'll walk through it. We're going to have 4 primary target areas. And then we're also looking at 4 special emphasis areas. We actually did the same thing in 2019 with a slightly different twist on topic areas for 2019, but here they are for 2020. For your targeted areas, we're looking for applications from 501c3s, educational institutions, CDFIs, and tribal governments. If you actually look at the request for application where it talks about target areas of funding possibilities, each one of those areas has some descriptive ideas underneath that area that'll give you a sense of the types of things that we're looking for. But there may be others that you just creatively think are of equal or greater importance to what we have listed. So just understand that we're looking at those 4 targeted areas of funding, which literally sit underneath the 4 major eligible organization types. Then we're looking at 4 special emphasis areas. For this year, for 2020, we're looking at traditional foods, food sovereignty, agricultural extension, advocacy, and youth programming. And I'm going to walk through each one of these 8. So there's 4 in targeted, 4 in special emphasis. But the youth programming we'll get to in a little bit too. We're going to use a separate application process for the youth programming because we're going to actually keep that request for applications open. We're not going to close it in June. We're going to keep it open through September. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking to do youth work, you have a longer window of time, and I'll explain more of that in just a second. So let's tackle this one by one. CDFIs, we'll look at those first. Funding applications are being sought from CDFIs or native CDFIs that are currently providing, or they believe that they can open up a new avenue of ag lending for native farmers and ranchers. We don't look at a specific percentage of your available pool of potential borrowers that have to be native farmers and ranchers, but we do think it's important for you to either have demonstrated activity in ag lending, or that you can show us that you're surrounded by farmers and ranchers, and you are starting to see more and more requests for your loan products to agriculture within our communities. So just be sure and talk about it in either one of those places. You're either already doing it, or you could do it very easily because there's a demand around where you live or where your offices are. And the CDFIs can apply for funding for loan products, for technical assistance, which all CDFIs do to some degree or another, or both. So just keep that in mind as well. There's a pool of $4 million that we set aside for CDFIs, and that's going to be made available to fund projects in this particular area, working with CDFIs. There's no set limit on the amount of total available funding for any one project, but we really don't want applications that exceed $4 million. So please tell us what you need, but please don't send us an application that is in excess of 4. We're going to try to fund as many CDFIs as we can. We did that last year as well. We may not get to all of them, but their primary need is lending capital. And so it just is important for all of us to keep talking the CDFI community as well as NAAF and us together, because this is one area that we want to continue to enhance and try to make sure that we partner with the CDFIs in such a way that we get more lending capital into those organizations, because it's important. And then educational organizations, let's look at them second. There we're looking for applications from educational organizations that can do any of the following: food and agriculture related classroom training, classroom education programs, ag programs, or professional degree programs that are applicable to food and agriculture. Scholarship programs, we're fine with that. Curriculum development, we're okay with that. But we really, on curriculum development, there's nothing worse than developing a curriculum and it never gets taught. So if you're thinking about curriculum development, make sure you build in a piece of this where you actually roll it out. We're also fine with research or applied research, but it's got to really make a difference to the success of native farmers and ranchers, and not just be theoretical or hypothetical at all, as its primary purpose. And we're fine with career technical training as well. All of those skill sets are needed in an educational arena to support agriculture. The projects can provide community technical assistance, other activities related to building success among native farmers and ranchers, improving access to food, or focusing on food sovereignty, or focusing on traditional foods, or working to do food systems improvement in Indian country. All of those are viable projects that would fall into an educational kind of targeted area. Again, we don't need to have folks that are just doing certificate or degree seeking programs, although those would be nice for sure. And we also are fine to support activities that improve food sovereignty, food access, subsistence activities, as well as agricultural sciences related to food and ag. And for educational organizations, we've put aside a total of $2 million in our pool for funding for this area for 2020. Again, there's no upper or lower limit on the amount of funds that you need to request, but no application really should exceed the total pool. And then there's overhead limitations. I failed to mention that with CDFIs, but we'll touch on that in a few slides over in the overhead piece. The administrative fees piece really sits across all of our applications. Okay, moving on to 501c3s. For funding applications here, again, make sure you're a 501c3 or that you're working through a fiscal sponsor. And we really want you to be able to let us know through your narrative and how you complete the application that we have in the system that you are working with native farmers and ranchers. And that if you work with native folks as well as non-native folks, that we really need for you to talk to us about the percentage of your larger portfolio of activities that are focused solely on the needs of native farmers and ranchers. In other words, we actually need for you to actually already be within our communities and working with us in some way or the other so that we can further that work. 501c3 organizations have to obviously meet the definition of eligible organizations, as I said earlier. They can provide any of the types of activities we've talked about that are within the mission of NAAF: business assistance, ag ed, technical support, or advocacy. And again, if you're a startup, nonprofit, then your fiscal sponsor, we need to have proof of their service to Indian country or native farming and ranching communities, and not just some random fiscal sponsor that you pulled together just to get the application in. We really need to know they're committed to you as well as to our communities. You're going to see this, the language that's on this particular slide. You're probably going to see it in a couple of more places. I'm going to go through it here. I might go quickly through it when it comes up again, but understand that when we were sitting down to do the final draft of the request for applications, everyone was just starting to be headed home and headed to shelter in place. And we just felt that it would be remiss on us if we did not put something in our request for applications that really talked about COVID impacts. And so we would love to see projects that come forward that are seeking support for planning activities to regionalize or localize food systems that support Native communities, economic analysis to determine total impacts and food systems solutions as a result of COVID, pandemic disaster for food that affect food access, response and contingency planning for Native food systems, resiliency planning for Native food systems, intertribal cooperative efforts within regions to bolster Native food systems, response plans for coordinated food production, and then planning for cooperative or coordinated food purchases within regions, hopefully that involve as much native farmer and rancher product as possible, or similar projects. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list. We really just wanted to kind of stimulate your thought process. We were already starting to talk to people and hear from people who were thinking regionally. They were also doing very specific actions locally where they were, because the food systems were under strain almost immediately when COVID really started hitting us hard. And it's going to take a while to repair and come out of those issues, but we felt it was a great opportunity right now for us to be looking at projects that we could fund that would really speak to the current realities and how we can plan for greater resilience within all of our communities, both individually and working together across regions. For 501c3s this year, we've got a pool of $3 million available for projects in this category. Again, no upper limit on the amount of funding that can be sought for any particular project, but no applicant should seek the entirety of the whole available pool. Again, indirect limitations apply here as well. The last category in this particular area of the targeted applications is tribes. And for here, if you look at the language that's in the request for applications itself, we also talked here again, like we did last year, about tribal governments actually trying to think about more value-added ag enterprise development. There's a lot of that already happening that is not only happening with tribal governments being involved in it, but also with nonprofits in their communities being involved. So really we are trying to make sure that we talk about the importance of value-added agriculture and really push some of the ideas and see if that resonates with what you're thinking where you are. Funding for value-added projects can be sought for feasibility studies. And for feasibility studies, I've done a bunch of them over the last many years. And they can involve things like architectural drawings, engineering drawings, legal analysis, or technical advisors for future value-added agriculture enterprise. Those are great to put in your budget to cover those kinds of project costs if you're pushing into this space of value-added. In addition to value-added projects, please also, you remember me talking in the previous slides about COVID-related issues, resiliency planning, intertribal food planning, regionalization. This is an area that we think also tribal governments have a lot of role to play in these conversations and in supporting this work. So we also included that sort of conversation within the targeted tribal government part of the RFA. And again, these are just some other ideas, including in that idea listing is agricultural resource management planning. Most tribal governments know that there's been a federal law in the books for 25 years that already authorizes tribal government ag resource management planning processes. There's many tribes that there's a few that have actually come through that and have those in place. There's several that are actually working on that now. There are some costs associated with doing that planning, and so we're fine if your tribal government is one that is seeking some support around doing ag resource management planning. And then also last year we had as a special emphasis area hemp production feasibility projects. We didn't include that as a special emphasis area for 2020, but what we did do is we retained much of the language that we had in the special emphasis for last year, and we pulled it up underneath the tribal government targeted application ideas. So you could still consider doing hemp production feasibility projects or planning projects. That's fine with us. The language is still in our RFA if that's what you seek to do. We have a pool of $2 million set aside for projects in this area. And because of the way our thinking is on this, we are going to be limiting those applications to around 150,000. The reason being that you can really get started solidly on some significant feasibility study work around all sorts of value added or other things that you might be doing in this kind of targeted price range. So that's what we're looking for in this particular targeted application area. We'll review higher request amounts, but just please understand that as we move through allocation of which projects will be funded, we're probably going to be adjusting budgets back down into the $150,000 range. Again, indirect limitations apply here as well. All right, let's going to move very quickly to special emphasis funding. And as I said earlier, we got 4 areas: traditional foods and food sovereignty, youth programming, agricultural extension, and advocacy. And I'm not, each one of these 4 special emphasis funding areas, we've allocated $1 million for each one of those areas. So that's the commonality that each one of them have this go around. Traditional foods and food sovereignty projects. Here we're looking for things that are in the range of 50 to 100,000, but those can be very wide ranging around traditional foods and food sovereignty activities, local community activities. If you've already done a food sovereignty assessment process and you're thinking about follow-up activities, that would be a great idea for this. If you're thinking about taking your community garden and it just keeps growing and growing, and you're thinking about scaling up and actually maybe pulling some of that production off into a commercial market, that's fine. That's obviously your choice, but maybe you just want to scale it up and make it bigger and more impactful. That's fine with us as well. The language that I talked about previously about things that would be in response to COVID-19 and the situation we're all in now, absolutely we would be fine to have you think about what you might be doing in the traditional food sovereignty area that would be COVID-19 reaction and recovery. Advocacy. NAAF, if you actually look at the language of the trust agreement, we can't support direct lobbying or political activity, but we also believe that we all need to be supporting the Native Farm Bill Coalition. That coalition came about in probably 2016, I believe, or 2017, and it was in the run-up to the most recent Farm Bill. The Farm Bill actually creates a lot of program authorities that Native communities, tribal governments have continued to get more and more involved in, and so we felt it was important that that coalition work needed to be supported, and that we need to continue all to work collectively to support that work impacting that major piece of legislation that deals with food and agriculture for the whole United States. And the more success that we can have there, the more those program authorities at USDA can be used by us. And so we felt it was important this year to really kind of hammer in on supporting advocacy that is already underway by the coalition and could continue to be supported over time as it rolls out and we gather more and more steam as we move forward. there's tribal consultation that's still underway right now that has to do with implementation of all of the successes that the Farm Bill Coalition were able to get for all of us with USDA. So that kind of activity could be funded here as well. And then preparing us for the next one, the next Farm Bill, but also the next COVID response bill. So there's just a lot of actual advocacy work that we all felt was extremely important that we begin investing in now. So we've set aside a pool of $1 million here as well. When the food sovereignty and the traditional foods, that's a pool of $1 million as well in that category. Youth programming, probably I tell this story all the time. One of the first things the trustees talked about when they first gathered up was how important it was to make sure our up and coming generations of younger producers and youth are finding their way into and supported in food and agriculture and community gardens and all of that. And so we just felt that it was really important for us to put significant resources this year behind a specific youth program, but we're taking that kind of different approach. We're going to leave the application process open for 6 months, and we're going to accept and look at and review and fund those projects on a rolling basis throughout that period. But youth engagement can occur in so many ways. It can occur K through 12 classroom. It can occur in outdoor classrooms or virtual environments, community youth gardens, ag policy councils, FFA 4-H, youth food summits, mobilizing Native youth to take on more roles in food system and food production activities, and so many other ways. Next slide. And they can also be hands-on production, youth-led projects, scholarships, online activities, and COVID response activities. What a great way to get our youth really engaged and passionate is to have their wonderful minds and their energy all involved with us about COVID response in the area of food and agriculture production. And then regional and national youth food and ag leadership projects. All of those are capable of being funded. So please just get creative and let us know how we can assist you in funding the youth work where you are. And by youth, we mean K through 12, but we also mean those early 20s, even early 30 time periods for people's lives when they're just getting started and established. Again, that pool is $1 million, and we're looking to fund a lot of small projects. So we're looking at things of no more than 50,000 here. And it's all in bold here on this slide, but we are going to keep the portal in our Foundant software system open from the period of April 1 through September 30, and we will be determining who to fund throughout that rolling period. Agricultural extension is one of those areas that people who do food production and are working in areas of food and agriculture honestly always need some sort of technical support. And historically, the tribal colleges and universities and other land grant institutions have been funded to and provided that support. But I'll tell you, over time, and I've done so much work in this area, it's always been underfunded, both at the TCU area level as well as even in the bigger institutions through programs such as FERTEP, the federally recognized tribal extension program. We just are deeply concerned about this. We know that farmers and ranchers are busy farming and ranching. Food sovereignty people and traditional food people are busy doing what they do. And it's so important to have that ring of support around them when they have technical questions or just need advice or need some assistance somehow. So that role of ag extension, we know it's important. We just have decided that we're going to actually start to look at how we can, as NAAF, actually support it even more deeply. What we're looking at here is, and we actually called it out and called it by name. What we want to do is really get all of us thinking about what a 21st century native ag extension system looks like and how it can actually function. Those projects and those programs have tended to be, singular to institutions or one-year competitive programs or almost one-off, and it's so hard to keep those types of services available to food people going on an ongoing basis. And so what we are looking for are projects that really kind of focus all of our attentions on how to actually move forward in this work and build a system that sits up under our food people in a better way. Again, we've set aside a pool of $1 million here as well. We think this is an important commitment on our part to really kind of show that this is a priority issue for us. And we really are looking for new multifaceted approaches to this sort of approach. It can be a mix of tribal colleges and universities or others, or even involving some 501c3s. I will tell you, this is all hands on deck, really. It's so important to build these systems that sit up under our food people. So just take a moment when you read through this, study it, and really think creatively about what you could put together. Okay, some points to consider in all the applications. What kind of services have you previously provided to Native farmers and ranchers? Try to talk about that and talk about what you plan to provide as well. And think critically about how much money you're actually asking for in your budget and how it fits within the overall budget for your organization or how it fits in with everything else you're doing. We believe firmly in Native leadership. We believe firmly in community and being accountable to our communities. So also think about these things. When I'm asking you to think about these things, I'm actually asking you to think about and put down on paper as you write your narrative about your project and try to really lift up some of these things as you're pulling together your project. What kind of steps are you going to use to make sure that the funds that we send you are used for the purposes that you've stated in your project? If you're in a Native community, how deeply embedded are you? If you're outside of a Native community, how connected are you to the Native community that you're serving? What is your leadership? Do you have board members who are representative of the community or accountable to the community? And there's several others, the 7 evaluation criteria. We talk a little bit about each one of them in the request for applications. So just read through that. If you got any other questions about kind of, points to consider, then just drop us a note and we'll try to answer that and include it in the FAQs so everybody can see. These are the 7 criteria for review. What are your proposed results? Talk to us a little bit about farmer and rancher demand in your area. We actually just held a webinar a few days back, maybe last week, I think. I can't remember. My webinars are pushing together. I can't remember. But we just held a webinar going through agricultural statistics and agricultural census numbers and really showing folks how to use the agricultural census to get a snapshot of who the farmers and ranchers are exactly all the way down into your county, for goodness sake. And so that data is available, but that kind of data really speaks to farmer and rancher demand. Are you talking to the folks in your area? Do you know what they need? But also, how many folks do you have in your area? And that agricultural census information can really help folks kind of put numbers to it, but also tell a story about it. We're looking for your team organizational capacity. If you have collaborators or partners, we're going to look at that as well. The impact on access to credit is really important. I've touched on that a little bit, and you can find more information within the RFA itself. We talk about evaluation and some things to think about as you evaluate what you're doing as you go. And then we also, talk to us about innovation. Are you doing things that haven't been done before, that are new and innovative for your community or for your work? And then also, folks, we are interested in thinking about how what we're doing where you are can be actually, how can the rest of us learn from that? When I say wide application and replicability, I'm really asking you to think about, can what you're doing be adapted for use somewhere else? Every Native community is so different, and I get that, but let's think too about how we can share what we're doing with others and really help all of us grow. And maybe if you've had some prior work and you've had mistakes and you've stumbled over some rocks, then how can we actually share that so that others don't have to stumble over the same rocks? And so that's what we're looking at in wide application and adaptability or replicability is, is something what you're doing, is it so unique to your community that no one else can do it, or is it something that can be shared? And so talking about your project in that way is going to be very helpful. All of those things really help you weave a story when you're writing up your project narrative and telling us what you are planning to do. So there are some mandatory documents like your tax exempt status, your resolution from your governing body like your board of trustees or your tribal council if you're dealing with the issues related to waiver of sovereign immunity. Some folks in the past have uploaded their employee identification number that is granted to you when you decide to organize your organization. That's really not what we're looking for. We're looking for the tax exempt certifications, as well as if you're a CDFI, for instance, you will have received some certification that you're recognized to function as a CDFI, that sort of thing. But if you ever got a question about the mandatory documents, the system actually will prompt you and let you know which are required and which are suggested. And so just get into the system, and the system itself, we tried to make it as simple as possible in terms of lifting up what we're looking for in terms of the documents we need. Should you receive an award, you're going to receive a grant agreement. We share those with our grant recipients only, and the grant agreement will have several sections in it. But we really need you to think about these things when you actually pull your application together. Really, the purpose of what you're trying to do, how you actually discuss it and discuss it in your budget, and how you actually also intend to be true to the organization type that you are. For instance, an educational institution really is authorized to work in educational arenas. A CDFI is authorized to work in CDFI areas, and 501c3s have certain requirements they have to meet annually as well. We also very much want the funds that we provide you through NAAF to not be diverted away from the project and program that you're actually going to say that you're going to be using them in. So just be mindful of that. When you do the budget, we're asking really that you only provide us on the budget documents the budget for the funding that you're specifically asking for. We have some required formats. We need for you to use those because there's so many different kind of budget formats. We can't deal with multiple, 10 or 20s. The budget template that we put together, the sample budget, the budget guidelines, the budget narrative sample, those are all on our website. You can download them, you can study them, but we need you to use our form so that we can actually have some consistency in our own internal records. But all of those guidelines and discussions are on our website. And then this is just some last minute tips about your budget. Just make sure that you tell us on the budget that how long the project is. There's also going to be a button, I believe Tony will tell you that there's a button that will actually ask you how long your project is as a separate question. If you're going to do more than 1 year, like if you're going to do a 2-year, 24-month project, we need you to separate the budget into columns and really identify what you're going to need in year 1 and what you're going to need in year 2. And then the narrative, really, we just ask you to discuss with us the types of things you're going to spend the money for in particular categories. It's all pretty self-explanatory, and we try to simplify it as much as possible. Don't forget to PDF your budget forms. It's really important because those numbers can get way off and look really weird if you don't PDF the document. Check your math. Sometimes those Excel spreadsheets and things like that don't actually, they usually work well, but just be sure and check your math and make sure things are not off. Wrap your text, and if the budget runs onto more than one page, make sure that you entitle the next page and include the column headings that you put on the first page again on the second page, so that it just reads as a clean document. This slide actually walks through some budget categories. Personnel, that's pretty self-explanatory. Direct costs. You know, if this last year, meetings and travel were quite popular in budgets, but you all know as well as we do that a lot of things are really kind of in limbo right now. So what we're suggesting to you is that go ahead and put in your budget what you think you might be using for meetings and travel, and just understand going into this that reflected as meetings and travel. If you're funded by us, just pick up the phone and email us. We will work with you to adjust your budgets. For instance, if your community remains on lockdown, or if things open back up and then they close back up again, we understand that's going to have implications for your budget and how you use your funds, but we'll work with you to move those funds into another category so that it makes sense for your project. Go ahead and include those costs in your budget, and then just understand and know that we will work with you to allocate them to another column or another area of your project, so that you don't lose the money, but you can use it for something else. Supplies and consultants, printing and publication, all that is kind of self-explanatory. If you've got questions, please just let us know at any time. Intermediary funds, the actual budget document itself has, if you drop down towards the bottom of it, it has a place for you. Like if you're asking for X amount of money for your internal operations, but you're going to put, for instance, 20,000 into re-granting, just indicate it as that, as re-granting amount for 20,000, and you might in your narrative say that's going to provide X number of scholarships for X folks. There's pretty simplified ways to do it, but we are asking you to capture re-granting, loans, and scholarships in that kind of drop-down category on the budget form itself. You'll see it. When you pull that up, it'll make sense to you. If you got any questions, just holler. Indirect costs apply to all of our projects, no matter what, no matter who, and we are limiting everyone to no more than 15% allowed indirect costs. For those of you who are familiar with indirects or administrative costs, you'll know what that means. We're not going to make this overly complicated. For those of you who have never worked in this space, just understand that it's okay by us for you to do a 15% that would retain within your organization so that you can have it for general administrative purposes, but we need for you to actually reflect it on the budget. And Tony, I think it's yours from now on out, and then we'll do questions after that.
All right, let me get that mouse. Till has iskan shootin' suited qua. Hello everyone, my name is Tony Stanger and I am calling in from Eastern Washington. I am going to walk you through how to get into our system and actually apply in Found It, the software that we use. So first thing is that there's a number of places you can go to find our link and our information about how to apply on our website. You can click different places and it will all take you back to our grant link. But before you go there, please go onto our website and locate our information and our document information. So we have all of the grant questions in a PDF form. We identify all the documents that you're going to need. So just get on our website and find out what it entails before you actually go in and start your application, because I know I've done this in the past where I just want to see what the grant is all about and what hoops I'm going to have to jump through before I actually dive in. Well, we're saving you time because we put that all on our website. So once you take a look at everything and you read our background documents, you will click the link and that link will take you to where our application software system begins. It's our logon page where you can start your application. Once you get there, it will ask you to begin your application by entering an email and a password, and that email will become your username. Now, we caution in all of our webinars that the person who enters this email, who starts this application on behalf of either a tribe or an organization, that person's email that they enter, again, is their username, and that is the only one that you can have in the system from this logon page. Later on, when people get into the application system, they can add collaborators to their grants, so they can add people that have different levels of involvement in the grant application itself, but there's really one person that gets in the system to start an application on behalf of an organization, a tribe, or an educational institution. So be cautious, make sure that the person that enters this information is going to be part of the application from beginning to end, and the person is available for us to contact, because that email then becomes the contact email that we will use for letting you know if you've been awarded a grant, if you need to amend anything in your grant. So last year we had some issues where people put a dean of their department or a tribal chairperson, and that person doesn't get in our system, like a point of contact or a grant manager would. And so we weren't hearing back from people, and we didn't realize why. That was the reason why. So just be cautious when you're setting this up. Make sure that that login person is the person that's going to be there from beginning to end. Once you get in the system and you enter your email and you create a password, you'll get a confirmation link, and please make sure that you get the email, because we have also had people that entered the wrong email, so they weren't getting information from us. It makes it harder for us to get back in there and fix your username and password. So just let us know right away if you don't get the confirmation email, and we can fix that. But moving forward, you'll begin to enter your organization's information. And it says organization information, but that's broad. It's your tribal information, whoever, any eligible entity, you'll enter this information. So your website, your EIN tax number. Like many of you, I am working from home, and that's my 4-year-old in the background yelling, "Mom." What? Hold on one second. The mailman came. Very exciting. Okay, moving forward. After you've created all and added all the account information, again, we're going back to talking about the signing authority and contact person within the system. It will ask you to enter information on your behalf for your organization's behalf, but also you can add another person to be in the system as well. So technically you'll have 2 people in the Foundit system, but the username and password to the organization is the one that we really want to be the person that's the main point of contact for your grant. Even if you're applying for multiple projects, we need one main person to be available to us. Okay, then you'll have the rest of this application to apply. And I apologize to those of you that are calling in and you're not seeing this screen, but you can go back and find this. Like Janie said, we record all of these. But the next few fields you'll have to fill in are called groups, and the gray bar that you see here and the ones below it, those are called groups, and each group has their own set of questions. So you'll fill out all of your organization's information, then you'll fill out the project contact information, the signing authority question, which we've changed a little bit in this year's application. So to try to let you know that that doesn't have to be your chairperson. We just need somebody that's going to be able to get in there and be available to us. So all this information needs to be filled out, and then you can move on to what is called your dashboard. So again, you'll get that contact information or confirmation email once all of this is put into the system. Make sure that it works. You'll come here to your dashboard, and the first time you open your dashboard, you'll have an apply button. You'll see any live grant agreements that we have. And if you look at the top of the screen, you see our logo, then a little tiny house, and next to the house is the apply button. Once you click the apply button, you will see the 2 RFAs that we have right now. We have our youth RFA, which again, we've separated because we've added additional funding and we've extended the time period for that to encourage more youth applications. But we also have our general RFA, and our general RFA will be on top and our youth will be on the bottom. You'll be able to access both of those. You'll click apply, but you have to apply for them separately. They'll have their own separate sets of questions. So you can get through the general RFA and then go back and apply for the youth. If you start either one of those, when you get to your dashboard, you'll see both of them and they'll say draft, and you can click on it and then you can begin to edit. Our system automatically saves. So if you exit out of your application, it will automatically save where you were, and you can keep going back and forth finishing both if you choose to apply for both. Once you click apply on either one of those, you'll have another set of groups of questions to fill out. The first one talks about your projects, what areas of funding you're going to apply for, more organizational information, applicant information, project fields. Anytime if you're going to only apply for one area, you're only going to see one additional group of questions. If you're going to apply for more groups of questions will start to show up. As Janie mentioned, we have required uploads. All of our uploads must be in PDF format, and you will have a list depending on how many areas you apply for, but each project has to have its own project narrative and budget template attached. We do have some optional areas for you to upload. We have a designated upload file name that we'd like. So we want to make sure that each organization is including what they're applying for, the type of funding, and then their organizational name, and then what the document is. Is it your budget or is it your budget narrative? So use that method to save your document and then upload it. The upload button is this gray button. It says upload a file. Anytime you click these blue required documents, they'll automatically download to your desktop. We also have these available in PDF on our website. We have upped the amount of space and character capacity throughout our application, and we've also summarized a lot of areas and condensed our application to make it more user-friendly. So we had a lot of people last year who had issues with the amount of space or characters within the application. They were running out of space, and a lot of people applied at the last minute, so it became a really bad issue for a lot of people, but we've fixed that. We've added more space. But again, we encourage you to get in there and submit your application before the end of the deadline or within hours of the deadline, because if you do have issues like that, we're going to be available to you. I know last year we were available to people on weekends. We were answering messages at midnight. I mean, we were doing our best to try to help, but we can't help you when there's only 2 minutes left before closing. We can help you when there's 2 days before closing. So that's another plug for you to please turn in your application soon. If there's any issues, we can fix it. Once you get done and get in the system again, you'll have a dashboard. This is a copy of a mock dashboard. And it will have all of your current applications. And if you applied last year, you'll see your information for your 2019 application as well. And anytime you return to your dashboard, if one of our main tools for communicating to you as an applicant and a grantee is through your dashboard. But if you become a grantee and you get an award, then this will be our main source of communication with you. And if we need additional documentation or follow-ups or quarterly updates, all of that will be requested in Foundit, and you'll see it in your dashboard. So now I'm going to talk about those who have already applied. If you applied in 2019, you will have a really great tool this year called Copy Request. And so all of our grants, I didn't say this at the beginning, but our grants are called processes. And so whenever we refer to a process, that means it's its own grant. So we had a 2019 process, we have a youth process, and our 2020 general RFA right now. Those are all processes within Foundit. And when you're looking at the system, you will be able to see your former drafts, and anything you included in there, if that question is asked in the next process, you can copy the request and that will automatically be input into your new application. Many of our questions remain the same, and you'll have access to all of your former uploads and documents you used in your last application. But the copy request moving forward will be even more useful because we really honed down the application this year, so we won't have to change a lot of it moving forward. So that copy process as we move forward for the next 19 years will become even more valuable. So know that that is available for you to use to help speed up this year's application. Our critical dates are April 1st is when we launched our youth and our general. Our closing date is June 1st, but again, if you get in before June 1st and you ask for a deadline extension due to COVID, you have until June 15th to finish your application. Another thing that we've discussed is that, and Janie mentioned earlier, if you're having issues with getting signatures or original documents, please upload copies or let us know in your application that due to your government being shut down or your school being shut down, you don't have access to that document right now, but that you have a plan to get it. So as long as we know that it's forthcoming, you can still submit your application. Our website is where you can find all of our essential documents, and our website is www.nativeamericanagriculturefund.org/grants. And our email information for technical assistance is grants@nativeamericanagriculturefund.org. We prefer online applications, but we will accept a paper application. The paper application questions are located on our website. If you're turning in a paper application, you have to abide by all of the space and character limits and deadlines associated with our online application. And that address for a paper application is Attention Grants Team at 534 West Research Center Boulevard, Suite 220, P.O. Box 1427, Fayetteville, Arkansas 72701. We have one more webinar that is our big Q&A webinar. That's where we will go through all the questions that have been asked, and we'll also highlight some of the issues. If we've heard a lot of people are having the same question or same issue, we can dive in and talk about those in that last webinar. So be sure to register for that last webinar. If you have questions, you can phone them in, email them, you can ask them live during the webinar. And our phone number is 479-445-6226, and the phone line is open Monday to Friday, 8 to 4 Central Time. You can leave a message, and we have a really great communications process where we log every phone call. We get back to you in a timely period, depending on what type of question it is. Some of them are legal questions. They take a little bit longer to answer, but we do our best to get back to you, and we keep a great record of that. So thank you for your time. Again, if you have questions, get them in the queue now, and we'll begin answering all of our Q&A.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you. And Tony, we have a few questions. Again, on your GoToWebinar panel, just type in the question. I'll see it and I'll read it out. Let's get started. The first question that I see says, if an application is primarily a food sovereignty application, but exceeds the $100,000 limit in that area, is there any reason to pursue a separate food sovereignty application in addition to 501c3? So if their project's over 100,000, should they just put it all in the 501c3 area?
You know, that's a strategy question that really is going to be left up to you all. But yeah, we're going to observe the limitations. If we've written them in, then we'll observe them in the category. But if you are a 501c3 and you wish to do something food sovereignty wise, there's nothing to prevent you from coming in the 501c3 door. But it's up to you where you choose to which avenue you choose to talk about and seek money for. I hope that makes sense. And Tony and Carly, jump in here if you want to add more detail to any of my answers.
Yeah, thank you for that chance. I think the really important question to ask yourself when you're considering multiple categories is whether your project is independent enough to proceed even if the other categories are not funded. So we appreciate all of the applications being very interdisciplinary, interconnected. You want to weave your things together, that's great. But if you separate it into 3 categories and you have a traditional foods, a youth, and an ag extension, if all 3 of those could proceed independently without the other ones being funded, then that's a good indication that they should be separate. But if 2 are funded and 1 is not, and everything falls apart, then that probably needs to be all together. So that's the way I look at it, and let us know if you have questions.
That's good advice.
The next question is, for funds allocated for re-grant purposes, in what detail do our tribal fishermen, we are a fishing, shell fishing, and hunting tribe, need to provide us with in regard to how those funds were spent? So I think the question is about what information do re-grant recipients have to give to the applicant?
You know, and Tony and Carly, you jump in here too, but my first response to that question is, you know, sometimes we've funded projects that literally are as simple as we're going to do, and I'm just giving you an example, and I'm going to use scholarships, but it's the same sort of principle really for re-granting. We're going to fund $20,000 worth of scholarships, and we're going to fund 5 scholarships at X amount. It could literally be that simple. If you want to provide us in your narrative with a little bit more detail about how you actually will select those recipients, then we would look forward to seeing that for sure. But it can be fairly simple.
And Janie, on that point, after this is, if an applicant is successful and they receive funds and they re-grant those to their tribal fishermen, will you ever ask for their name or information or that type of stuff?
There could be an instance, yeah, if one of our staff are working with you all and we've got a question about how you distributed those funds, then we may want to ask you at some point in time exactly how you distributed them and also to whom. But you know, this is a really interesting question. We do need some specificity, but we're not going to require you to send us a list unless we ask for it. So that doesn't have to be a part of your regular reporting. But I'll tell you, this question actually has come up very recently because the federal government is actually pushing out, actually starting next week, individual payments to producers to help them deal with COVID impacts. And if you don't know who your producers are or your fishers are, then it's really difficult to get people situated and provide them assistance to actually come into those programs and get some relief funds right now. So we've actually been asked, NAAF has been asked in the last couple of weeks if we would be interested in actually helping to stand up a registry of producers, farmers, ranchers, fishers, you know, so that we can talk to people and get information that is extremely important out into individuals' hands quickly. If we ever did something like that, we would hold those names so confidential, and we would never, no, we're not going to go post them anywhere or sell them to anybody. But we could be in a circumstance where at some point in the periodic updates that you provide us that we would like to see a list of who those resources went to.
Thank
I
you.
would just add that we are fiduciarily responsible as for this trust and where the money goes. We are privately funded, but we are not only responsible for being good stewards of this funds as an organization and a nonprofit, which we need to protect our nonprofit status, but also as individuals. So we aren't as going to ask you as much information as maybe a federal grant might. Like we're not going to ask for the account numbers or social security numbers of who you're regranting to. But if we do feel that there might be some type of fraud, we are going to have to pursue that in the future. We have 2 people that are assigned to each grantee. So you have a primary and secondary point of contact to work with you almost daily. I mean, I've answered phone calls on the weekends at 6 in the morning from my grantees. So there should never be a problem where we get to that place, but we do have a responsibility to make sure that we're being good stewards of these funds and they're going to Native American farmers and ranchers.
Thanks, Tony. That's great additional information.
Thank you both. So the next question, if we applied in 2019 and didn't receive funding, is there feedback from the panel on the decision for not funding? This feedback would be helpful in our 2020 submission.
Yeah, actually, when we notified everyone as to whether they were funded or not funded, we also let people know that they should reach out to us as soon as possible, and we would sit down and go over with them their application for that wasn't funded, and that we left that. I think we scheduled those kinds of calls with folks for about a month. But then when we shifted gears and started working on the 2020 application, and then particularly when we opened the door and put the application out publicly, it's our internal policy that we don't do that sort of one-on-one on previously filed applications. So what that should tell you is if you applied in 2019 and you didn't seek out any sort of input, that door is now closed because we're in this new process, we're in the 2020 process. If you're not funded again in 2020, then be sure when you get notification that you call us right away and get on our schedule so that we can walk through your application, because we'll do that for a period of time, but then we're going to close that window and turn to the next process. And we don't want any kind of individualized one-on-one assistance to blur into the next request for applications. So just keep that in mind. And yes, we did provide it in 2019. We only had about half of the folks that we didn't fund that asked for that sort of one-on-one. We're totally willing to provide it after the 2020 process is over, but just be aware that we need you to get back with us quickly if you're denied funding, so that we can do that quickly and that it not blur into the next process.
Thank you. The next
And
question.
also, I want to add something to that, Carly. If you have a hypothesis of maybe why you didn't get funded, you can try to formulate that into a question for our next webinar, where we can try to address that. But we, like Janie said, we're not doing one-on-ones with 2019 just because we don't want to. We're not guiding people in how to fill out their application just ethically right now.
Thank you. The next question says, where will the in-person grantee meeting be? And do we budget this within our proposal, or do we cover this cost under our indirect?
We want you to, you could do it either way, but we want it reflected somewhere in your budget. Again, keep in mind that we're asking everybody to put money for an in-person grantee meeting in their budget, but realistically, everyone on this webinar or who listens to it later, we are cognizant very much so that we're likely going to have to work with you to adjust that budget and stick that money into another budget category. If we are all in a place where we can't move around and shouldn't be traveling, then we're not going to place you at risk or your communities at risk to have an in-person meeting. We'll just visit with you through your points of contact on our staff and do whatever we can to work with each one of us and as a group. We love the idea and we love getting together with grantees. We just are going to be putting your safety and our own staff safety first and foremost. So just for now, put the money in the budget. I think it's better to show it as a part of your travel budget, but it needs to be in your budget so that it's visible to us. And again, if we get to the point where none of us can move around, then we will not have a meeting and we will just work with you to slide that money into another category.
Thank you. And the 2020 RFA overview estimates that would be $750. So stick a placeholder of $750 into your travel section and label that grantee meeting, and we'll move from there. Our next question says, our proposed project includes 4 reservations in 3 states. For the sections of the application, Native leadership and partnerships, networks, and collaborations, would you like us to organize, label, and describe according to each of the 4 sites?
Tony, what are your thoughts on that?
I think we had that in our last applications. We had applicants who were working with multiple tribes, and we had a couple that were bordering states. So they did that in their narrative section. But if it's for a specific, if the projects are separated, then yeah, each project has to be identified. Yeah, please, I say yes, try to in your narrative.
Yeah, and if you try to include it one place and it might fit somewhere else, repeat it. I just think it's good to know. So yeah, I agree with Tony.
Okay. Next question says, does the 15% for indirect costs use the base as all expenditures, direct costs and intermediary costs combined?
I'm going to leave that to whoever asked that question. We actually have that addressed in our budget narrative guidelines. So that information is in that sample form, and we've discussed it there.
Yep, and if it's all right, Janie, so you will calculate your indirect cost only on your direct costs. So not on scholarships, loans, or re-grants. Those are intermediary costs and they will not count for your indirect cost calculation. Let us know if you have questions.
Yeah, be sure and read those instructions on the budget and look at all those samples.
Next, what are the reporting requirements for re-grants? For example, can grants/scholarships be given to individual farmers with no strings attached, or will we be required to track how the re-grants funds are spent?
We don't try to deeply in the weeds orchestrate your re-granting program. That is up to you to structure it. We need for you to explain to us how you've restructured it. I mean, how you structured it, and how you're going to make your decisions and kind of what the whole purpose is behind that re-granting program. But you, as the applicant, will you'll have an annual report that's required. And then we're going to ask, and we're already doing it with our 2019 grantees, we're asking for a periodic, like quarterly update. That is going to really, like for instance, if you are going to do re-granting to fishers, but you're going to space it out over the year about when you actually release those funds for re-granting, then whenever you do a quarterly update to us, then you would just tell us that in that quarter you re-granted to X number of fishers. I hope that makes sense. Your year-end report would roll all of that up. But in this quarterly update, which is not very onerous, it literally is just a few questions and just checking in. But that's going to be up to you about when and how you roll that out.
The next question says, if we have a long-term project, are we better off to submit a larger grant for a longer period or to plan on submitting several small ones?
That's really up to the individual applicant about what strategy they think makes the most sense for their project. Some projects actually don't lend themselves to having phases, if you will, and like applying this year for phase 1 and then later on you'll apply for phase 2. You have to really kind of get in the weeds and understand deeply what you're trying to do and when, and really think about whether you want to ask for all of it up front as for instance, a 2-year project, or whether you want to, come in as a phase 1 and then take a breather and do an application further down in the future for phase 2. That really is a strategy on your part. There's really no right or wrong answer here. It depends on what you're trying to do and when you're trying to do it and whether it makes sense.
Thank you. Next question says, I see in the process document a suggested format for 501c3 targeted objectives that includes objectives, activities, milestones, and outcomes. But there are also separate questions about outcomes and milestones. Do we duplicate the info in the targeted objective section too? Thanks. And if somebody wants to speak on this, and I'm going to pull this up on the screen so we can look at it together.
Tony, do you want to take that one? Or I can, either one.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Janie.
No, you go ahead.
All right. We ask those, so if you applied last year, you would notice that that type of question was pretty repetitive. We basically asked it 4 times in each project you applied for, so you would be repeating yourself over and over again. We have taken out some of the goals because people got pretty lofty and what their overall goals would be, but we really just wanted to know, what were you going to accomplish in the next 12 months or 24 months? So we really want to hone in on your objectives, and depending on how many areas you apply for. So if you're applying in targeted, you're going to answer that question twice. it will be for a specific area. If you're going to answer it in special emphasis, you'll answer that question again, but it's because it's two different projects. So you could be doing value added as a tribe, but then you also want to do traditional foods, and you'll have to answer those questions twice. They can be, you can kind of answer them similarly if it's the same audience, like the same tribal community you're going to serve that information, but we want to know what the difference is between what your value added project is and your traditional food project is. So we don't want you to cut and paste and cut and paste. We want to know, what are you going to accomplish in that time period for the amount of money that you're getting for each area.
You know, and I want to add too, for some projects, it just depends too. I hate to say that, but it does. It depends on what it is you're trying to do. Some things that we do on the ground are so intertwined that it's really hard to actually talk about them separately. But then some things that we do are capable of really being talked about as youth versus traditional foods. Sometimes we talk about those things and they're totally enmeshed and the same thing. So it's really how it's okay with us if you repeat. I guess is what I'm trying to say. We're not going to be bothered by that. What it really is important for you to do, we think, is to really think if you're gonna have one application and you're gonna have 3 different areas that are included in that application, then really think about how you talk about them separately, but then also explain to us how they're all interwoven too, because that's important to know.
Thank you. And on that topic, on the screen now, if you're following along, I've pulled up the question. This is what it says: targeted 501c3 objectives, but this applies to any category that you're applying for. Please provide at least 3 to 5 objectives you seek to accomplish during the proposed project period. For each objective, please discuss activities, milestones, and outcomes associated with that objective. So if you had 3 different ones, you would say objective number 1, and then put the activities, milestones, and outcomes for that objective, and then space down and say objective number 2 and do the same thing. And hopefully, like Tony said, this will be a more condensed fashion of finding out what your objectives, activities, milestones, outcomes are. Let us know if you have any specific questions there. The next question is about naming the files. So Tony mentioned that we have a naming system. You can find that information in the online grant system. So the example that she used, it had PA, that's just an example. So please pay attention to the budget upload area in the online grant system to tell you how we want it named. It's going to include your organization's name and some other things. Let us know if you have questions. Next. For youth, there are a multitude of projects we want to implement, but they would require someone working full-time. Can salary be written in?
Yes.
I also want to go back to that last question. Sorry, Carly. And the reason why we want you to have your organizational name in there is that otherwise we have 100 of documents that are titled the same. Budget document, and so it's a way for us to make sure that your records stay distinctly within your file.
Thank you. The next question says, in doing the online application and using a fiscal agent, does the fiscal agent complete the app as the organization?
Yes, because we're relying on their 501c3 status to actually prove that an eligible entity has applied. So that's really important, that they literally be the one to push it forward, because we got to have their documents. But here's the most important part, actually, is if you're an organization that's working with a fiscal sponsor, then you need to be really in the weeds with them, right now, and talking through this project together. I've run across folks in the past who've used fiscal sponsors and they just have nominal involvement, and then they got the project money and then the relationship fell apart. You don't want that to happen. And the sooner you can start talking with your fiscal sponsor and get kind of both on the same page about who's going to go in and what kind of documentation is needed, the better off you'll be.
For a lot of those that used fiscal sponsors last year, they had the actual project leader who was seeking the funding for certain projects would apply with their fiscal sponsors information, but they would discuss each section and fill it out as if it was their organization. So they wouldn't, the fiscal sponsor wouldn't speak in third person filling out the application. Often it was that organization who was filling it out saying what they were going to do, and the fiscal sponsors organizational name, their tax information, their required uploads to prove their eligibility, those were all the fiscal sponsors. But the project ideas and goals were that of the organization or fledgling organization seeking the fiscal sponsor.
Thank you. So now I'd like to invite anybody to submit last minute questions that they might have. We are here to answer those live. While we're waiting for more questions, I just want to show you on my screen here, this is what our website 2020 RFA page looks like. So if you find the tractor, you're in the right spot. You'll see that we have the deadline in big letters and we have information about extension. Again, this deadline does not apply to youth. That is in September. You can scroll down here and we've laid out some information. Scroll through the tabs below, read the full RFA overview. It's a 20-some page document and that's your starting place. Here you can preview the questions without creating an account, as Tony was saying. So just take a look and see if it looks like it applies to you. And then finally you can click here, or you can click the big red button and go to our online application, and that's where you make a username and have an account and then submit your online application. All of these black tabs here you can click on and it tells you specific information. Here's where our webinar info is and here's where our FAQs are. So just explore that and contact us here if you have any questions. We have one more question that came in. It says, is the mandatory copy of a resolution from the governing body a requirement for all applicants, specifically for 501c3s? So does a 501c3 need a resolution from their board to apply?
I will tell you, it's not needed for all organization types. That really comes down, for sure, it's at some point, the tribal governments are going to have to put forward all of their related documentation that we have to have, such as their waiver of sovereign immunity. And Tony, I want you to speak to that in just a second to kind of reiterate that. But 501c3 organizations, you know, it depends on how you function. Some organizations I know require their board to sign off on through a resolution on any grants they submit to anybody. Others do not. And so there's no way of us to know that, how we would know that going into it. It would be, we do need a letter from your senior official, and then if you receive money from us, then your authorized official has to be the one who signs the documents. And again, that's going to be dependent on your organization. For 501c3s, it's likely going to be at least your executive director or CEO. It might be your CFO if that's the way you function within your organization. We have to be confident in the knowledge that whoever actually does receive the funds, that the senior officials are cognizant of the funds being awarded and are committed to the project. But Tony, could you speak for a minute about the tribal government resolution piece?
Yeah, before I go into the tribes, I also want to say that it's the same for educational organizations. If you're applying on behalf of your institution and maybe you're an adjunct faculty, then you likely don't have the authority to sign off or obligate your school. So we really just need to know who has the authority to obligate. And depending on how you're chartered and how your organization or tribe functions, it could be an arm of your organization or your administration, but we just need to know that that person has that authority to obligate. As far as tribes are concerned, we do not need a resolution for the application when you apply. We did have a handful of those last year, but what we really need is the limited waiver of immunity that is identifying how much funding you're receiving and the duration of your grant. And that limited waiver will have to be depending on how your tribe, again, every tribe is unique. It might be a resolution. It might be that your president or governor has the authority. You might be applying as an arm of the federal government, and Section 17s have the authority to waive, so they don't need the resolution from the tribe. But look into that right now before you apply, because we had a couple applicants last year who, even though it's in the application and we talk about it in every webinar, didn't realize that they needed the waiver, and they went through the whole process, and we review your application, and it's really unfair to those who are ready to go and they have the support of their community. They didn't have the opportunity to get funded this last round. So we have been creative in trying to adapt. So if you can't get a resolution from, say, your tribal government, then you can look for a fiscal sponsor, maybe a nonprofit. But we've even had applications where the governing body, the tribal council, passed a resolution in support of the application, and the chairperson, our governor, signed off on it, our president, and then when it came time for the immunity waiver, they declined. So then again, we had to get creative, but we really want to make sure that if you're applying no right now, you are eventually going to have a limited waiver, and that goes for some of our state institutions as well. That if we need to get a waiver, we're going to have one, and as Janie said, it's not because we want it, it's because it's required. And we do our best. We do have draft waiver language. We'll work with you. We'll talk to your attorneys, whether that's in-house or contract. We'll do whatever we can to assist you in getting this waiver, but it is a requirement. And also one more thing that's related to this. If you are partnering with another organization, in our support letter section, we would like you to include in that section that they're aware that you are wanting to work with them and they're going to be part of your project. And so it doesn't have to even be an official document. It could be a copy of an email saying, yes, they agree to be part of this future project. But I've given the example in other webinars where it's like when you're in construction, you have to go in to apply for a project knowing that your subcontractors are going to be part of that project. They've agreed to it. It's the same thing. We want to make sure that we don't give you this funding and then under the guise that it's a collaborative project and you're using other organizations or your tribe or a school, and then all of a sudden they're not part of the project.
Thank you. We have another question. Does the resolution requirement also apply for the fiscal sponsor arrangement? So if you're using a fiscal sponsor, what information does the fiscal sponsor have to provide? A letter from their senior official, a letter from their board?
Whoever's the applying party and on whose eligibility status you'd be relying on to seek funds, that's who we need that sort of information from. But again, the fiscal sponsor is going to have an authorized representative, as Tony was discussing. That fiscal sponsor may actually have a requirement internal to them that requires some sort of resolution or a board motion or a board resolution or some action. You're welcome to upload that into our system, but many organizations don't have that sort of internal process. And so what we would be looking for there would be a letter or signed by an official that acknowledges that they are interested in applying. If you're awarded, then we will get down into the weeds with you about making sure that whoever signs the agreement with us is the proper party to sign the agreement.
Okay, so I'd like to invite everyone still on the call, submit your question if you have one. We'll wait a moment to see if more come through. Just because I have my screen up, I'll show you what happens when you click the red button. You go to this log on page like Tony showed before. I go here frequently, so you see my information is already filling in. And one thing I would suggest is that if you are doing this, keep this link handy, maybe even make it a favorite. You can press this little button here and make it a favorite so that you can keep getting back here. This is how we will communicate with you. So at this moment, I don't see any new questions. I just want to reiterate some information before we sign off. The first thing is that all of our grant information is found on this webpage. So there's multiple ways to get here. If you go to our home page, you're going to click grants and go here to 2020 RFA, but please find your way here. Look at what we have and then set up your online application. You do have the option to mail in a hard copy application, but that has to be postmarked by the deadline, June 1. If you are requesting an extension and you're going to do a paper application, you have to request that extension by June 1. So call us or email and get that on the record. Once you go here and find the information, if you don't see what you're looking for, you have questions, contact us by email or by phone, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Again, with that extension, if you need it, say it, tell us what's going on, and do that as soon as you can. We've already had several requests, and we're able to process those as they come in, and those folks will have until June 15th. Deadline is at 11:59 p.m. Try to submit before then so that you don't get into the backlog. We're going to have one more of these webinars next week, Thursday, May 28th at 2 p.m. Central Time. That one is going to be reserved for question and answers mostly. So a very abbreviated slideshow and then a lot of questions and answers and technical issues. That's your time to get on our schedule and ask it and get a question answered right away. So please come back for that. All of these webinars are recorded, and if you go here and go to grants webinars, you can see all the ones that we've had so far, and we'll make any updates to FAQs as needed. I don't see, we have one more question. So if I work for an elementary middle school, should I apply for something with salary in education?
I'm assuming you're talking about applying in the youth programming, and the budget forms are the same there as they are for other all the other applicants. So you're welcome to apply for that and include that in your budget or not.
And on that note, I would just say you also should work with your school. State or tribally funded schools might have their own provisions about where salary can come from. So while we don't have a prohibition on that, please make sure that your school says it's okay too. Okay, so Janie, anything you want to leave us with?
I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to be on the webinar today, and I wish all of us wish you well, and we pray for your safety and your health and that of your families and communities, and we're excited to see what applications we get this go around, and we're going to be working as hard as we can to move this on as expeditiously as possible so that we can present the applications to the trustees, and they can make their decisions on what projects to fund. So good luck, everybody, and just holler at us if you've got any questions at all. And Tony, do you want to close us out?
I just want to add that please, when you're applying, think about your community and how this can serve your community, and know that depending on what type of entity you are, you can collaborate and you're not going to compete against people in your same community. For instance, if your tribe is applying and you have an extension, maybe think about applying together and expanding the depth of what you could do with those funds. you're not going to compete against each other because you're applying for different parts of our funding. So the more the merrier. Please get the word out to let people know that our deadline is quickly approaching, and get your information in as soon as possible.
Thank you all. Join us next week at the same time. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.